to Shelf Help, a channel dedicated to talking to the void about whatever book I happen to be reading. I'm your host, the reader. The following review will contain spoilers. So, The Witcher. Okay, this book is a clusterfuck, and it's not entirely the author's fault, though he isn't innocent either. Now, before everyone jumps in and points out The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny came first, I am aware. I have heard everything from they're just prequels to they're where the story actually begins. In any account, this show is about judging a book for what it is. If someone goes into a store to get a copy of The Witcher, this is the book with the number 1 on the spine. So this is where I'm going to start. There are a couple things going on here. First, is this series was originally written in Polish, not English. And there's nothing wrong with that. But translation is almost never one-to-one. And there are definitely parts where I'm wondering if the cultural idioms got lost in translation. For example, several characters say, "You saw the stars on the water at night and mistook them for the heavens." It's just kind of an awkward phrase, and it strikes me as one of those Schadenfreude type words that just doesn't translate to English real well. There is another place where it says variations on Geralt was angry, about 10 times in 2 paragraphs. Again, I suspect a translation issue. Second, this was written in 1994. If you are familiar with late 80s and early 90s epic fantasy, you know it has a certain flavor. They're generally dominated by stoic, uber-manly, straight, white heroes who bet everything with breasts and a pulse. There's almost always a war for the hero to be drawn into, a child of destiny, a one-true king mythos, and sprinkled with casual homophobia, sexism, and a tendency to hand-wave away mild pedophilia as a different time. Third, this is not a series. It's a single story. If each part is as long as this one, that makes the entire story about 3,500 pages. That's a big book. Even by my standards, that's a big book. But reader, I hear you say, The Lord of the Rings is one story. Harry Potter is one story. True. But each book in these series is an independent narrative arc. Blood of Elves is not a story. It's the opening to various storylines. It's 400 pages of character introductions that go nowhere. Fourth, there's no map. Who makes an epic fantasy without a map? A scene where 2 characters talk about geography isn't very helpful, especially not in the long run. So what do we have here? On the surface, this is my kind of book. A mercenary monster hunter trying to stay neutral and protect those he cares about as a war brews around them. That's my candy. In reality, this book is politics heavy and monster fighting light. After an action scene that turns out to be a dream, it falls down the exposition hole. A group of diverse, unnamed characters from every race and caste all expound on a recent war they all participated in, and current events, and race relations, and... Look, I get it. You have to set up your world somehow. But this ain't it. There are better ways to give history than having a bunch of people sitting around telling each other things they already know. It isn't even useful. This entire section could be cut, and nothing would be lost. Show. Don't tell. I'm convinced that 80s, 90s epic fantasy is the origin of this phrase, because they are notorious for their exposition dumps. Anyway, after literally 17 pages of exposition, we find the story. Sort of. The exposition actually goes on for about 150 pages, but at least it's going along with something story-ish. Mostly it's about the child surprise, and how everyone wants her dead, for reasons. Seriously, there's some prophecy, but it's not in the book. So I have no idea why everyone is so hot under the collar about this one girl. The girl in question is Ciri. She's 12 or 13 when we meet her, and the lost princess of Cintra. Sometimes called the Child Surprise, or the Lion Cub. She is destined for Geralt, the White Wolf Witcher. And since he's raising her as a daughter, I really hope that doesn't mean what it implies. Ciri is a bit disconcerting. She's a preteen, raised as a noble until age 10, and talks like she's 8. I don't know if this is an artifact of translation, but it's kind of weird. In the middle of all this, we come across a trope that makes me see red. Men don't know what to do with a girl becoming a woman, and they need a woman to set them straight. This is sexist in absolutely every direction. So Triss, a female mage the Witchers brought in to deal with Ciri's merging magical powers, finds out Ciri is flowering, and she scolds the Witchers for not knowing or being nicer to her, and how a girl has her days and needs rest. And they immediately capitulate and agree to give her the days off training when she's wearing a dress to indicate she is indisposed. Dudes. My dudes. Are we really going to get on this old rag? But you have mothers, sisters, perhaps of the step variety, wives, female friends, female co-workers. Barring conditions like ovarian cysts, do any of these people have their lives come to a screeching halt once a month? Just because the red tide rolls in doesn't mean life stops. As much as I would love to spend a little lady time as an excuse to sit around reading, shit's still gotta get done. We still need to go to work, kids still need to be taken to school, pets still need to be walked and fed, meals still need to be made. That's the nature of the beast. It ain't a code red. And I know, this is a medieval setting. We love to focus on the upper class who had leisure time. They still had duties, even when strawberries were in season. But most of the people of these times were peasants, and if Aunt Flo was visiting, she was just going to have to come out and work the fields too. This trope needs to be bled out. Period. Anyway, thing is, being a woman does not make us delicate flowers. Ciri has been handling training every day, and there's no reason she can't keep doing so just because she's got her lady days. The idea that women are dolls is sexist. Men, especially men who get around as much as these seem to, are older than they look and live in a time where Victorian mores were not a thing. Getting all flustered by female puberty look like idiots. From here we get a scene where they travel with some dwarves and learn about the elves and the guardians and why witchers must be neutral. And it would have been great if it wasn't just a retread of all the exposition up until this point. Also, we never see these characters again. After that, we get a series of scenes that can be summarized as, is the Lion Cub of Sintra alive? We must capture her and or kill her. In scene, never see those characters again. I know. In fantasy, you want to get all your important players on the board. But this is basically 400 pages of introductions. So we end up with a bunch of characters and scenes that go nowhere. There are too many characters that don't get anywhere enough screen time for me to relate to them in any meaningful way, especially since almost all of them are one and done. We end the story with Ciri remembering her time with mage Yennefer. The entire arc is crammed into about 55 pages, which sounds like a lot, but it's mostly just a highlight reel. Some scenes are just dialogue. Yennefer is awful, and Ciri says she didn't like her at first, but she likes her now. It's a little Stockholmy. The fact that Yennefer was Geralt's lover before he went to find Ciri, and the fact that a priestess has to say to Yennefer about Ciri, she is not your rival, doesn't help matters. Okay, here's the thing. I believe in death of the author. Once a book is published, it has to stand on its own. Even a book that is part of a series must have a self-contained narrative. It must have its own story arc. I understand why they broke this into smaller books. 3,500 pages is too big for a book. Even by the standards of late 80s, early 90s fantasy, that is too much. The average person is not going to pick that up. However, look at literally any series. Even those with overarching plots that run through the series, each book has its own narrative. Let me use a contemporary series as an example. A Song of Fire and Ice. A lot of characters have stories that span the entire series. But within Game of Thrones, Ned and Drogo have complete story arcs. And even characters that go on to be in the entire series have minor arcs they complete. Cersei succeeds in killing her husband and placing her son on the Iron Throne. Jon Snow accepts his place at the Wall. Daenerys becomes the mother of dragons. Sansa realizes that Joffrey is a gaping maw of a diseased asshole. That's not what happens in Blood of Elves. The closest thing to an arc is Ciri and Yennefer's scenes, and those are so abbreviated, I hesitate to call it an arc. I understand why they broke it up. It's far too long to be a single physical book. However, most people aren't going to buy 8 books at $15 to $17 a pop for a story they don't know if they will like. I'm not going to put this on a shelf. It is what it is. It is very much late 80s, early 90s epic fantasy. But it's not a story. It's just a long, exposition-heavy introduction. For now, I withhold judgment. I am going to go back and pick up The Last Wish. It will probably provide illumination, but it's not going to help that this part of the book is almost entirely exposition and introductions. From there, we'll see if I want to continue the book. If long books aren't your thing, probably want to look somewhere else on this one. Thank you for your time. I know everyone's mileage will vary, so feel free to leave your thoughts.